It started like any other afternoon or so, it seemed. But what looked like a routine police interaction quickly spiraled into something much darker. When a pair of arrogant officers thought they could intimidate a young black girl walking home from school. What they didn't know, she wasn't just any girl, and the man standing behind her wasn't just any father, he was the highest-ranking law enforcement officer in the state. What follows is a story of prejudice, power, and a moment that sparks a fire across an entire town. And believe me, the justice that's coming, it's not the kind you learn in a textbook. So sit back, turn up the volume, and let's get into it. And hey, let us know what time you're listening and where you're tuning in from. Drop a comment below. We read every one. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this with someone who still believes the truth always finds its voice. It was a quiet morning in Harmony Falls, the kind of morning that smelled like dew and sounded like birds calling from the tops of oak trees. The town was still stretching itself, awake, coffee brewing, porch swings creaking, screen doors slamming softly as people stepped out to greet another day. On one of those sleepy sidewalks, under the long shadow of a rusted old water tower, walked a girl who believed today would be just like any other. Her name was Amira Bell. She was 14, tall for her age, with dark brown skin and eyes that saw everything. Her braids were thick and long, cascading down her back in neat rows that her grandma had spent hours perfecting the night before. Her white blouse was crisp, her navy skirt ironed, and in her right hand she clutched a black violin case like it held the world, because to her it did. Amira wasn't just a student, she was the first black concertmaster in Harmony Falls Middle School history. She had an audition coming up, a solo piece she'd been practicing for months, and if she nailed it, she'd be playing at the state showcase in Street Louis, a big deal for a girl from a town where black excellence was often ignored or whispered about with suspicion. She walked with purpose, humming softly under her breath, the notes to her solo dancing in her mind like a second heartbeat. Her school was just 3 blocks away, past the corner store and the diner with the flickering open sign, the one where her grandma used to wash dishes back in the 70s. She crossed the street at Maple and Twund, the sun just peeking over the rooftops, casting a golden glow on the sidewalk. She didn't notice the police cruiser parked halfway down the block. Not at first. But someone else noticed her. Inside the cruiser, Officer Chad Morton sipped lukewarm coffee, his eyes fixed on nothing in particular, until Amira stepped into view. Something about the way she moved, confident and upright, caught his attention. Or maybe it was just her skin, or the violin case, or maybe it was the quiet rage he carried like a loaded gun rage that didn't always need a reason. He watched her for a second longer than necessary, then set down his coffee. Amira didn't see him pull out of the parking spot, didn't hear the tires roll over the pavement. She was focused, thinking about her bowing technique, about that tricky part in the second movement. The only sound in her ears was music, until it wasn't. "Hey!" a voice barked behind her. She froze mid-step. Her heart skipped. She turned around slowly. The police car had pulled up next to her. Officer Morton had already stepped out. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and wore mirrored sunglasses, even though the sun was barely up. His uniform was neat, pressed, but his tone was already hostile. "Where you headed?" he asked, stepping closer. Amira blinked. "To school," she said, cautiously polite. He glanced down at her violin case. "What's in the bag?" It's my violin, sir." Morton stared at her a little too long. His silence stretched until it started to feel dangerous. "You sure?" he said finally. "We've had reports of shoplifting in the area. You match the description." Her eyes widened. "Sir, one didn't." He cut her off. "Turn around." That's when the humming stopped. That's when the world, for Amira, shifted from soft focus to sharp, cruel clarity. "Sir, one didn't steal anything." "Turn around," he snapped. Neighbors peered through blinds. A man coming out of the diner paused on the sidewalk. A couple across the street looked up from their paper cups. No one moved. No one said a word. Amira set her violin case down gently on the sidewalk. Her hands were trembling. She turned slowly, trying not to cry. He yanked her wrists behind her back and slapped the cuffs on too tight. Her breath caught in her throat. "This is a mistake," she whispered. But he wasn't listening. Inside the cruiser, his dashcam recorded everything. The engine rumbled. The cruiser backed up and drove off. Amira in the back seat, her braids pressed against the glass, eyes wide, scared, and still unsure what exactly she'd done wrong. Behind her, the violin case lay abandoned on the sidewalk like a forgotten dream. The town of Harmony Falls kept waking up, unaware or unwilling to care that one of its daughters had just been taken, that a line had been crossed, that the first note of something much darker had just been played. And trust me, this was only the beginning. Every morning before Amira left the house, her grandmother Louise would watch her from the front porch. She didn't say much, never did. But her eyes, those old, weary eyes, they said everything. That morning, just like every other, Louise sat in her rocker with a coffee cup that had seen better days, one slippered foot pushing the chair forward ever so gently, like a metronome set to worry. She was wrapped in a faded robe with a Bible on her lap, though she hadn't turned the page in 10 minutes. She watched Amira lace up her shoes at the bottom of the steps, watched her smooth out her skirt, watched her check her reflection in the glass door, fix the collar, straighten her back. Amira had always been proud of how she looked. When she walked out into the world, Louise taught her that. But pride could be dangerous too, and Louise knew that better than anyone. Walk straight. Keep your eyes forward, she finally said, her voice just above a whisper. Amira glanced back with a smile. Always do, Grandma. Louise took a slow sip of coffee. If someone stops you, you speak clear. Say yes, sir, no, sir. You don't argue. You don't cry. You stay calm. I know, Amira said. You've told me 100 times. I'll tell you 100 more. It wasn't paranoia. Not to Louise. It was preparation. Something she had passed down like an heirloom. Her own mother had given her the same talk, back when it wasn't police cruisers, but dogs and fire hoses and men with ropes. Louise had seen too much to trust too easily. She didn't hate the town. Harmony Falls had been her home for 52 years. She knew every block, every name on every mailbox, who owned which truck, who kept chickens in their backyard, and who pretended to be nice until something challenged their picture of what belonged. And Amira. Amira was starting to stand out, a black girl with talent and ambition, who spoke with confidence and played the violin like she was born for the stage. That didn't go unnoticed. Not in a town where folks still used words like well-spoken, like it was a surprise. Louise had felt the shift coming, like a storm cloud too far off to hear but too dark to ignore. Maybe it was the way Officer Morton had started patrolling more aggressively near the school, or the way some neighbors had stopped saying hello when Amira got that newspaper feature for winning first chair. It didn't take much to rattle the quiet order of Harmony Falls. Before Amira left, Louise stood up slow, joints popping, and walked down the steps. She pulled something from her robe pocket, a folded $20 bill. "Get yourself lunch after school," she said. "From somewhere decent. Not that cafeteria mystery meat." Amira smiled wide and took it. "Thanks, Grandma." Louise touched her granddaughter's cheek, just for a second that seemed to stretch forever now. "If anything feels wrong, anything at all, you call me. No matter what." "I will," Amira said, hugging her quick before turning away, violin case in hand. Louise watched her walk off. That same strong stride, that little swing in her step like she had music in her bones. The sun hadn't fully risen, but already Louise's chest felt tight. A pressure she couldn't quite name. She went back to her chair but didn't sit. She stood there, holding onto the porch railing, long after Amira turned the corner. The coffee in her mug had gone cold, but she couldn't make herself go inside. Not yet. Something gnawed at her, something louder than worry, something heavier than instinct. A car drove past, then another. Birds chirped. The neighbor's dog barked. But none of it registered. Her heart was somewhere else, riding shotgun in a police cruiser, maybe. Or lying on a sidewalk next to a broken violin. Louise had lived through riots, through curfews, through headlines that read like echoes of her childhood. She had seen kids, just like Amira, pushed down, boxed in, silenced. And every time it happened, the world would pretend to be shocked. For a moment, but only for a moment. The world, she knew, didn't stay outraged for long, not unless the right people got mad. Inside, the old clock in the hallway chimed 7:30. Louise finally stepped back through the screen door, her legs stiff, her hands still on the knob. She didn't know yet what had happened a few blocks away, didn't know her granddaughter was sitting in the back of a police car, or that a man with mirrored sunglasses had already begun unraveling something sacred. All she knew was that her heart had been right to worry, and she wouldn't be able to sit still again, not until her baby came home. It was just past 8 p.m. when Amira turned the corner onto Main Street. Her school was only a few blocks away now. The air was crisp, the sky above Harmony Falls, a wide stretch of soft blue, dotted with slow-moving clouds. She could already see the school's brick silhouette rising behind the trees in the distance, and with every step, she rehearsed the opening bars of her solo piece in her head. Today was a rehearsal day. Her music teacher said the state judges might drop in unannounced. Amira wasn't worried. She'd practiced that violin part so many times she could hear it in her dreams. It was the one place she felt fully herself, in front of that orchestra, with her bow in hand, commanding silence. She didn't see the cruiser at first. It was parked sideways, in front of Grady's Hardware, engine idling. The windows were rolled down halfway, and inside, Officer Chad Morton was leaned back, one arm out the window, the other clutching a paper cup from the gas station down the road. He watched Amira. Something in his face shifted the moment he laid eyes on her. She wasn't doing anything wrong, just walking, just being. But to Morton, that was enough. A black girl, alone, moving confidently through his town, his street. That rubbed him the wrong way. He'd never liked seeing young people who looked like they didn't know their place. Morton sat forward, set his cup down in the holder, adjusted his belt, and tapped the gear shift. The cruiser pulled away from the curb and rolled forward. Amira was now halfway across the block. She hadn't noticed the car moving behind her. She adjusted the strap on her shoulder and stepped past the old laundromat where her grandma used to bring her as a toddler. Her mind was on the performance. Her feet moved with rhythm until she heard the whoop of the siren behind her. Just one burst, sharp, cold. She turned instinctively and squinted into the glare of the cruiser's headlights. Her brows furrowed. The car rolled closer and stopped right beside her. The window buzzed down further. "Hey!" Morton barked. Amira flinched. She took a small step back, almost bumping into the fire hydrant behind her. "Yes, sir," she said, voice small but steady. "What's in the case?" Amira blinked, lifting the black violin case a few inches. It's a violin. For school." Morton stepped out of the cruiser. The door slammed shut with a heavy thud. He was tall, broad. His badge glinted in the sun. His boots scuffed the sidewalk as he walked closer. One hand rested on his utility belt like it was second nature. "You stealing that?" The words hit like ice water. "What?" "No," Amira said quickly. "It's mine. I've had it for 2 years. My school knows me." "Uh-huh." He circled her like a shark. She turned slightly to face him, careful not to make any sudden moves. Her fingers tightened on the violin case. "What's your name?" "Amira Bell." "Where do you live?" "Just a few blocks away on Cedar." "What's the address?" She gave it. Her voice cracked just a little. Morton nodded like he was listening, but his eyes were doing something else entirely. He wasn't hearing her. He wasn't trying to understand. He was sizing her up. "You always walk this way to school?" "Yes, sir. Every day." "You sure you didn't stop by the 7-Eleven this morning?" "No, sir. I haven't been near there today." "Funny." You matched the description of someone who lifted a wallet from a guy's pocket. Amira felt her stomach drop. That's not me. You calling me a liar? No, I didn't do anything. I swear. By now, two older folks sitting on the diner patio across the street had turned to watch. A mailman paused halfway up the stairs to the law office on the corner. A young mother pushing a stroller stopped, her hand instinctively pressing her baby closer. But no one said anything. No one crossed the street. Morton stepped closer. Let me see what's in the case. She hesitated. I'd rather not open it here, please. It's fragile. I didn't do anything wrong. I said, open the damn case. His voice cut through the street like a whip. Amira jumped. Her hands shook as she set the violin case gently on the sidewalk and unlatched it. Inside, the instrument gleamed, a beautiful polished brown. Her sheet music was folded neatly in the lid's pouch. Morton looked down, eyes narrowing. Fancy. He didn't touch the violin, but he didn't step back either. I still think something's off, he muttered. I'm not a thief, Amira said, barely louder than a whisper. That's so? He shot back. Turn around. Hands behind your back. Her breath caught in her chest. I didn't. Do it. She looked around. The people on the sidewalk were frozen, eyes wide, mouths shut. No one moved. Slowly, Amira turned. The sound of her own heartbeat filled her ears. She felt his hand grab one wrist, then the other. The cold metal of the cuffs bit into her skin. She was 14. She was 5'3". She weighed 110 pounds. And now, she was in handcuffs, standing on Main Street like a criminal. Morton grabbed the violin case and slammed it shut. The sound made her jump again. You're under suspicion of theft, he said loudly, his voice projecting for the crowd. We'll sort it out downtown. She didn't struggle, didn't scream, didn't run, just stood there, tears filling her eyes but not falling. Because her grandmother had taught her, never let them see you break. He led her toward the cruiser. The whole walk, he said nothing more, just kept one heavy hand on her shoulder, pushing her along like a broken doll. He opened the back door, ducked her head roughly, and shoved her inside. The door slammed. Amira's reflection stared back at her from the glass divider. Her braids, her eyes, her silence. She'd never felt so small, so helpless, so exposed. The cruiser pulled off slowly, wheels grinding over gravel. Her violin, she noticed, had been tossed in the front seat. It wasn't buckled in. She turned her head and looked out the window one last time. The world outside kept moving cars, people, sunshine, just like nothing had happened. But for Amira, everything had changed, and there was no going back. The cruiser idled for a second before pulling away, its blue and red lights still flickering though the siren was off. On the sidewalk behind them, the world stood still for a moment, and then quietly began moving again. But the echoes of what just happened didn't fade so quickly. The people who saw it, the ones who watched Officer Morton shove a handcuffed 14-year-old black girl into the back of his car, had different reactions. Some shook their heads, some looked away, some just froze. But no one did anything. No one walked across the street to say, wait a minute. No one asked, is she okay? No one challenged the officer's tone, or his accusations, or the way he'd handled a child like she was a threat. Because that's how it works in towns like Harmony Falls. People watch, but they don't step in. Not when the badge is involved. Not when the child isn't theirs. Not when the one being taken away doesn't look like them. Across the street, an older man named Harold Jenks had been sipping his morning coffee at the diner. He'd seen the whole thing. His knuckles were white around the mug, his lips pressed together so tight they'd gone colorless. He was 73, a veteran. He knew injustice when he saw it. But he didn't move. He told himself maybe she had stolen something. Maybe the officer knew something he didn't. Maybe stepping in would make things worse. And so he stayed seated. 3 tables over, Miss S. McLean, a retired school teacher, dabbed her eyes with a napkin and whispered, "That poor baby." But she didn't speak up either. She didn't raise her voice to the officer. She didn't walk over to Amira and ask if she needed help. The young mother with the stroller? She backed away slowly, crossed the street in the opposite direction, and never looked back. The mailman finished his route like nothing had happened. Everyone kept living their lives. Amira's violin case still sat on the sidewalk where she'd placed it, now gathering dust beside a crooked fire hydrant. No one picked it up. No one protected it. It sat there like a silent witness to everything that had just gone wrong. Inside the cruiser, Amira sat perfectly still. Her heart was pounding, her throat tight. She didn't cry. Not yet. She stared straight ahead, out the side window, watching the storefronts blur past. She didn't know who to call. Did they even let kids make a phone call? Did she get one? How long would she be there? Her thoughts raced through every scary thing she'd ever seen in a movie, every story her grandma had told her, every news headline she'd ever overheard. The cuffs hurt. They weren't meant for wrists that small. Morton didn't speak the entire drive. He kept one hand on the wheel and the other resting on his thigh, like nothing about this moment required reflection. He didn't see a musician. He didn't see someone's daughter. He didn't see someone terrified and innocent. He saw a target. He saw control. At a red light, a woman in a passing sedan looked over and saw Amira in the back seat. Their eyes met for half a second. The woman looked shocked, maybe even concerned, but then the light turned green and the car rolled forward. That moment, those few seconds of silent eye contact, stuck in Amira's mind. She wanted the woman to turn around, to follow them, to ask questions, but she didn't. No one did. They arrived at the station 5 minutes later. The cruiser pulled around to the back entrance, away from the public front doors. Amira's mouth went dry. Morton stepped out, adjusted his belt, and opened the back door. He didn't say a word as he reached in and pulled her out by the arm, steering her toward the building like she was property. The back door buzzed open, and the cold, sterile air hit her like a wall. Fluorescent lights, gray concrete floors, and an overwhelming silence filled with tension. No reception desk here, no waiting area, just a hallway with peeling paint and doors that locked from the outside. Morton led her into one of the side rooms. It had a metal table, 2 chairs, and no windows. It looked like a place people went to disappear. He sat her down, finally removed the cuffs. Amira rubbed her wrists, red and sore, but didn't say a word. Her voice had gone somewhere deep inside, hiding where it felt safe. Morton leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "You sure about that violin story?" he asked. She nodded once. "You think I'm stupid?" "No," she whispered. "That's good, because I'm not." He stepped out of the room and closed the door behind him. She heard the click. Locked in. Amira sat in that room for what felt like hours. Time bent. Her legs went numb. She kept her eyes on the table, refusing to cry. Crying felt like weakness, and she wasn't going to give them that. No phone, no lawyer, no grandma, just silence. Back on Main Street, a young man named Tariq, a junior at the local high school, had seen the whole thing from a block away. He hadn't gotten close, he knew better. He knew the risk. But he pulled out his phone and recorded a short clip from across the street. Just a few seconds. The officer yelling, the handcuffs, the look on Amira's face. That video? He didn't post it right away. He thought about it first. He'd seen what happened to other kids who put things online. Some got called liars. Some got suspended. Some got doxxed. But in the end, as he sat in the library watching the clip loop over and over, Tariq made a decision. He uploaded it. No filter, no caption, just the raw footage. It didn't go viral yet, but it started moving. Friends reshared it. Then classmates. Then someone from the nearby college. Then a community page picked it up. A few hours later, someone from the local paper called Tariq and asked if he'd be willing to talk. He wasn't sure yet. He said he'd think about it. But something had begun. A spark had landed. And though no one had helped Amira on that sidewalk, the silence wasn't going to last forever. The room was freezing. Not from the air conditioning, though the vents above hummed softly, but from the feeling. The way the walls seemed to lean in. The way the gray paint sucked all the color out of the space. The way everything felt too still, like time itself was watching her. Amira sat on a hard metal chair in a small holding room inside the Harmony Falls Police Department. Her wrists were raw where the cuffs had pressed, but she didn't touch them. She didn't move much at all. No one had spoken to her since she was brought in. No one had read her any rights. No one had offered her water. No one had asked her who her parents were. No one had called a guardian. She was just there, alone, 14 years old, in a strange room, under lock and key. With no idea what was coming next, she stared at the table in front of her. There were scratch marks on it, little grooves, initials, a name carved so deep the wood had splintered. She ran her fingers across them absent-mindedly, grounding herself in something physical, something real. She thought about her violin. She didn't know where it was. She'd seen it tossed in the front seat of the cruiser but hadn't seen it since. It was probably still there. Or maybe it had been left behind on the sidewalk. Or, worse, damaged. That thought stung more than she expected. Her music teacher had told her just last week that the piece she'd been working on had something special. She remembered him saying, "When you play, people feel it, Amira. You don't just hit the notes. You live them." That had meant everything to her. Because music wasn't just something she did, it was the way she held herself together. Now all of that felt far away, like another life. A loud clunk broke the silence as the door opened, and Officer Morton stepped back in, a clipboard in one hand and a pen in the other. He didn't look at her when he spoke. "You know what happens when people lie to the police?" Amira blinked. "I didn't lie." He finally looked at her eyes flat, unreadable. "You said you weren't near the 7-Eleven this morning." "I wasn't." "Funny. Because a guy reported seeing someone who looked like you leaving the store with something under her coat." "I don't even have a coat," she said quietly, gesturing to her uniform blouse and skirt. "And I didn't go near there. I walked straight to school." He wrote something on the clipboard, still not looking at her. "I want to call my grandma," she said. He didn't respond. "Please," she added. He sighed. "You'll get your chance. Just sit tight." Then he walked out again. The door closed behind him with that same heavy click. Tears threatened to rise, but Amira blinked them back. She remembered what Grandma Louise had told her over and over again. Never cry in front of people like that. Never let them see they've broken you. And so she didn't. But that didn't mean she wasn't breaking. She sat alone for another stretch of what felt like forever. Her stomach growled. Her hands fidgeted. Her mind replayed the arrest like a broken film reel over and over. The sharp voice, the handcuffs, the sound of the violin case snapping shut, the people watching and saying nothing. She wondered if anyone even knew where she was. Her grandma must have figured something was wrong by now. Amira always texted the minute she got to school. She never missed a check-in. Surely someone would come looking for her. Surely someone cared enough to ask. She heard muffled voices through the wall, then footsteps, then nothing again. It was like the world had swallowed her whole and left her suspended in some in-between space where time didn't work right. At one point, a younger female officer passed by and glanced into the room through the narrow window. Their eyes met. The woman paused, her brow furrowed for a moment, like maybe something didn't feel right. Then she kept walking. That was it. One brief flicker of recognition, and gone. It wasn't until nearly an hour later that another officer one Amira hadn't seen before came in. He wore a badge but had no name tag. He carried a plain manila folder and a styrofoam cup. "You want some water?" he asked, like it was the first time anyone had remembered. She was human. She nodded. He set the cup down on the table and slid the folder in front of her. "Know what this is?" he asked. She shook her head. "Your file," he said. "Not that there's much in it. Never been in trouble before, huh?" "No, sir." "Well," he said, sitting down across from her. "That's good. Let's keep it that way." His voice wasn't harsh like Morton's, But it wasn't warm either, just business. "I don't understand why I'm here," she said finally. "There was a report," he replied. "An incident. You matched the description. But I didn't do anything." He nodded slowly, like he'd heard it all before. "That's what most people say. Can I call my grandma now? I'll check." He stood, picked up the folder and left. Didn't even touch the water. The cup sat there, untouched. Outside, the day was moving on without her. Bells had rung. First period had started. Her classmates were probably wondering where she was. Or maybe they weren't. She thought of her grandma pacing on the porch. She thought of the uneaten breakfast. The $20 bill still folded in her pocket. The promise she made to call if anything went wrong. This had gone wrong, and no one had called her family. She didn't know what time it was anymore. The silence stretched again. Then finally, a sound. The buzz of the lock. The door opened. It wasn't Morton. It wasn't the quiet officer. It was a civilian. A woman in a blue shirt and black slacks, holding a clipboard and looking confused. "Amira Bell?" she asked. Amira sat up straighter. "Yes, you're being released." The girl blinked. "But I wasn't charged?" "No, there's been a misunderstanding." The woman didn't explain further. She was led down a long corridor toward the front entrance. No apologies offered, no explanations given. When she stepped outside, the sunlight hit her face like a slap. Everything was loud again, bright, real, except she didn't feel real. She felt like she'd stepped back into the world as a different person. One who now knew what it meant to be taken, to vanish, to wait, to wonder if anyone would come. And for hours, no one had. The sun was beginning to rise higher over Harmony Falls when Amira was pulled from the holding room, her legs stiff, and her mind spinning from the silence she'd been forced to sit through. The hallways smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant. The light overhead was harsh, humming faintly with that eerie flicker only fluorescent bulbs know how to make. She didn't know where they were taking her. No one explained anything. The civilian woman who'd told her she was being released had vanished just as quickly as she appeared. And now, it was Officer Morton who had returned, his jaw clenched, eyes hard, walking with a purpose that made the floor beneath her shoes feel less steady. "Come on," he grunted. "We're doing this the easy way or the hard way." She didn't know what this was. She didn't ask. Her voice had gone quiet again, tucked away somewhere behind her ribs, where it felt safer not to use it. He led her through a door marked processing, though she hadn't been booked, fingerprinted, or charged. There were no records, no intake. She was in the system, but not really. She was inside the machinery of something cruel and unspoken, something that didn't need paperwork to exist. The room was cold. A chair sat in the middle, under a hanging light bulb. It looked like the kind of setup you'd see in movies about bad guys getting interrogated, not innocent girls being detained for walking to school. A second officer stood in the corner, a woman this time, mid-40s. Sandy blonde hair tied tight into a bun, her badge read Marks. She didn't say a word as Amira stepped inside. Just watched. Morton gestured to the chair. "Sit." Amira didn't move. "Sit down." She flinched and obeyed. Her hands gripped the seat tightly. Her heart beat so loud she was afraid they could hear it through the walls. Marks walked over and placed a small plastic bag on the table beside them. Inside was a pair of electric clippers. The sight made Amira's chest collapse inward. "What? What's that for?" she asked, voice cracking for the first time. Morton rolled up his sleeves. "You want to know what we find in kids' hair these days? Razors, drugs, blades, all kinds of junk. You think we're gonna just let that walk out of here? But I don't. There's nothing in my hair. You can check, you can feel. Please don't. We are checking. Call my grandma. Please, I want someone here." Marks finally spoke, cold and detached. "We can conduct a safety inspection under suspicion. It's policy." Amira's breath came in short gasps. "Now, I didn't do anything." Morton flipped the switch on the clippers. The sharp buzz filled the room. It was Mechanical. Final. Like a warning bell you couldn't turn off. He didn't ask again. He stepped forward and, without hesitation, grabbed the back of her head. Don't move. No, please, please don't do this. But the buzz began. The sound changed as it passed through her braids, chewing through what her grandmother had so lovingly twisted the night before. Long, thick strands fell around her shoulders, onto the floor, into her lap. She screamed, not loud but broken, cracked open. The kind of scream that isn't meant to frighten. It's meant to beg. Morton didn't pause. Mark stood in silence, arms crossed. Tears streamed down Amira's face now, her chest rising and falling in jagged bursts. "Stop!" she cried. "I'm not hiding anything. Why are you doing this to me?" But the buzz didn't stop. Hair collected on the floor like petals from a storm. Her scalp began to show. She felt the air hit places that hadn't seen light in years. Her neck trembled, her jaw locked. Still, she didn't fight. Because how do you fight someone holding the clippers and the badge? All she could do was sit and watch her identity fall piece by piece. By the time Morton stepped back and switched the clippers off, the room was silent again, except for Amira's breathing, except for the sound of tears dropping onto her shirt, except for the horrible echo of something sacred being taken without permission. Her hands reached up slowly. They hovered. She didn't want to feel it, but she had to. Her fingers touched the skin where hair used to be. Her shoulders shook. Morton tossed the clippers onto the table like a man done mowing the lawn. "No contraband," Marks noted flatly. Morton gave a shrug. Guess she got lucky. And then they just walked out. Left her there, alone, in the chair, with pieces of herself scattered across the floor. The fluorescent light buzzed on. Outside the room, the station went on with business as usual. Phones rang. Typing continued. Laughter echoed faintly from someone's desk. Harmony Falls moved on. But in that small, locked room, time stood still. Amira sat for another 5 minutes before someone else came to get her. Another stranger. Another face that didn't know what had just happened in that chair. "Your release paperwork is ready," the woman said, not looking at her closely enough to see the redness around her eyes or the uneven patches of skin on her head. "You're good to go. Go where?" Amira asked, her voice dry and empty. "Home." She stood slowly, her legs wobbled. She held her violin case, now returned to her hands, cold and foreign, and walked through the station lobby like a ghost. No one made eye contact. No one apologized. No one explained anything. She stepped outside and blinked in the sunlight. Everything was too bright, too loud. Her fingers clutched her case. Her other hand touched her scalp again. It didn't feel real. She didn't feel real. And still, no one had called her family. She pulled her phone from her pocket. It had been returned with her things. 2 missed calls. One from Grandma Louise. One from her school. She dialed quickly, her thumb trembling. Louise answered on the first ring. "Amira? Baby, where are you?" That voice shaken. Desperate was the only thing strong enough to crack the numb shell around Amira's heart. "Grandma," she whispered. They shaved my hair." Louise was silent for 2 whole seconds. Then her voice turned to steel. "Where are you right now?" "I'm outside the police station. I'm on my way." The line went dead. Amira sat on the steps, knees pulled to her chest, violin beside her. She didn't know how long she sat there. 10 minutes. 15 maybe. Then she saw Louise's old Buick roll around the corner. It didn't even park properly. Just jerked into a red zone and stopped. Louise got out and ran like a woman half her age toward her granddaughter. She stopped short when she saw her, eyes wide, hand over her mouth. The braids she'd woven now just a memory. "Oh my God, Grandma, I didn't do anything." Louise gathered her into her arms, held her tight, rocking her softly like she used to when Amira was small. "I know, baby. I know you didn't." And as they stood there on the sidewalk, sunlight pouring down on a town that refused to look itself in the mirror, one thing was clear: they had broken something precious. But they hadn't broken her. Not completely. Not yet. The drive home was nearly silent. Grandma Louise kept both hands tight on the steering wheel, her jaw clenched, eyes forward. Her body said everything her mouth wouldn't. Rage, grief, shame, all of it bubbling just beneath the surface like boiling water under a thin lid. Amira sat in the passenger seat, arms wrapped around her violin case, which now felt more like a shield than an instrument. Her head leaned against the window, and her scalp, freshly bare, ached against the cool glass. The breeze from the cracked window touched places no breeze had touched in years. She hadn't said much since leaving the station. She didn't have the words. Louise had asked just one thing: did they hurt you anywhere else? And when Amira whispered no, that was the end of it. Louise didn't push. She didn't need details. She'd seen enough in one glance to carry her fury for a lifetime. When they turned onto Cedar Street, the house came into view small, one story, with peeling paint and a front porch that leaned a little to the left. Home. But even the word felt strange now. Home meant safety. Home meant peace. And today, peace was nowhere to be found. Louise pulled into the driveway and killed the engine. "Come on," she said softly. Amira followed, slowly, her legs heavy like she was walking through water. She stepped onto the porch, where just that morning she'd stood tall, confident, polished. A proud girl with her braids neat and her dreams in hand. Now she moved like someone else, like a shadow. Inside, Louise gently guided her to the couch and wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. The living room was warm, filled with old books and even older furniture. A photo of her father in his military uniform hanging above the mantel. The quiet hum of the ceiling fan overhead was the only sound between them for a long time. Louise disappeared into the kitchen. A few minutes later, she returned with a cup of tea and placed it on the table. Amira didn't reach for it. She just sat, unmoving. Then finally, in a voice so quiet it barely existed, she asked, "Do I still look like me?" Louise swallowed hard before answering. "You look exactly like you." Amira's lips trembled. She shook her head. "I feel like they took something. They did. I didn't do anything wrong." "I know, baby." "Then why did it feel like punishment?" Louise sat down beside her and took her hand. Her fingers were warm, steady. "Because it was," she said. "That's exactly what it was." They sat there like that, two generations of black women, one weathered by time, and the other freshly scarred by it, saying nothing more, because there was nothing else to say that wouldn't burn on the way out. Hours passed. The sun dipped low, casting gold across the curtains. And still, no call came from the police. No explanation. No apology. But someone else was going to need an explanation very soon, because what Amira didn't know was that her father had landed just a few hours ago. General Isaiah Bell had returned from Washington, D.C., and was headed home to surprise his daughter after her rehearsal. He had no idea what had happened. He didn't know about the sidewalk, the arrest, the clippers, the tears. Not yet. He didn't know that while he was testifying before Congress about the dangers of unchecked police authority, his own daughter was living the very nightmare he warned them about. Louise's phone sat on the kitchen counter, face down. It buzzed. She didn't check it right away. A few minutes later, it buzzed again. Isaiah's voice came through the voicemail. "Mom, I'm about an hour out. Just landed in Colombia. Don't tell Amira I want to surprise her. Got something big to share. Love you." Louise's shoulders sank as she listened to the message. "Lord, give me strength," she whispered. In the living room, Amira had finally fallen asleep, curled on the couch with her violin case held to her chest like a life raft. The blanket had slipped from her shoulder. Louise walked over and gently adjusted it, brushing her hand over the side of Amira's face. She froze for a moment as her palm passed over her granddaughter's bare scalp. She shut her eyes tight. A single tear fell. She hadn't cried in 20 years. Not since her husband died, but now she did. Not just for Amira, for every girl who'd ever been treated like less. For every boy who'd been cuffed without reason. For every mother who'd waited at a police station for a child they weren't even told had been taken. Outside, the sky turned purple. A storm was coming, not of thunder, but of reckoning. And Isaiah Bell was almost home. The town of Harmony Falls didn't know it yet, but the silence was over. It began with a video, short, grainy, shot from a safe distance across the street. No narration, no music. Just the raw moment, a black girl in a school uniform being handcuffed on a sidewalk, her violin case resting on the ground beside her, and a white officer barking orders like she was a danger to the community. The video was just 42 seconds long, but sometimes 42 seconds is all it takes to crack a quiet lie wide open. The boy who filmed it, Rick Johnson, wasn't the kind to seek attention. He didn't want to go viral. He didn't even post it at first. But as he sat in the back of the school library, watching the clip over and over, something inside him started to churn. That could have been his sister. That could have been him. He uploaded the video that evening. No hashtags, no commentary, just the raw file, unedited. Within hours, it started to move. A classmate reposted it. Then a local activist group. Then a regional black student union. The shares doubled, tripled. People commented, "Who is she? What did she do? Why does he look so comfortable doing that?" No one had answers yet, but the image spoke for itself. That night, the Bell household was quiet. Amira hadn't said much since waking up from her nap. She sat at the kitchen table, still in the same clothes, a knit cap now pulled down low over her shaved head. Louise had made dinner collard greens, cornbread, and stew, but the plates were mostly untouched. Neither of them could eat. The quiet wasn't peaceful. It was thick, dense, like the air before a tornado touches down. Then the front door creaked open. Boots stepped onto the floorboards, heavy, familiar. "Mom?" Louise looked up, and then Isaiah Bell walked into the room, tall, built like he was carved from stone. The weight of 4 tours, 2 stars, and a lifetime of discipline carried in every step. But none of the training, the rank, the war zones prepared him for the sight of his daughter when she turned to face him. His Amira, his little girl, with a knit cap covering what had once been a head full of joyfully braided hair. Her eyes locked on his, and for a moment, she didn't speak. She just stood. Then, with all the weight she'd been carrying, she let it out in one breath. "Daddy." Isaiah crossed the kitchen in 2 steps and wrapped his arms around her. She broke, finally. The tears came fast and hot. Her shoulders shook. Her hands clung to the back of his jacket like she was drowning, and he was the only thing keeping her above water. Louise looked away. Her hand covered her mouth, but her shoulders trembled too. Isaiah didn't ask questions, not yet. He just held her. One hand on the back of her head, the other around her shoulders, steady as the earth. After a while, when Amira had calmed enough to sit, Isaiah looked at his mother. "Tell me everything," Louise did. From the moment Amira left that morning until the second she came home broken, Isaiah listened, jaw tight, hands clenched on the table, his face unreadable but his silence loud. When Louise finished, there was a pause. Then he stood, walked into the next room, and called someone. Not a friend, not a neighbor, someone in DCS, someone who answered the phone with, "Sir, what's wrong?" What Isaiah said next was calm, measured, but deadly serious. "They assaulted my daughter," he said. "No charges, no call. She's 14. They shaved her head without consent. I want you to trigger the protocol." "You know the one." There was a pause on the other end. "Yes, sir," came the reply. "Understood." Isaiah ended the call. When he returned to the kitchen, he sat down again. His voice was even. "I'm going to need the name of every officer involved," he said to Louise. "And I want that video." "What video?" Amira asked, wiping her face. Isaiah turned the phone toward her. It was already up on his feed. The clip of her arrest. It had nearly 12,000 views. Her eyes widened. "Someone filmed it?" Isaiah nodded. "And that's just the beginning. Because by sunrise, Harmony Falls wasn't going to be quiet anymore." Isaiah Bell wasn't a man who shouted when he was angry. He didn't throw things, didn't curse, didn't make threats. He planned, he listened, and when it was time, he moved with precision. That night, after the house had gone quiet, and Amira had finally fallen asleep upstairs, Isaiah stood alone in the living room, staring at the family photo on the mantel. It was from 2 years ago. Amira, in her recital dress, holding her violin proudly, braids tied back with a ribbon. Louise beside her, Isaiah behind them, in uniform. He remembered that night. She'd played like the angels. And afterward, she'd looked up at him from the stage and mouthed, "Did I do good?" He had nodded, too choked up to speak. Now, that same little girl had come home bald and broken because of a badge that thought it couldn't be touched. Isaiah picked up his phone again, scrolled through the video, watched it, watched her face as she was cuffed, watched Morton's posture, arrogant, smug, careless, watched how no one stepped in, and something shifted inside him. This wasn't going away quietly. He pulled up a private contact list, one not found in any phone book. These were people who owed him favors, people with titles, people who had sat across from him in classified rooms when no cameras were allowed. He made 3 calls that night. The first was to an old friend at the Department of Justice, a woman named Valerie, smart, sharp, tenacious. When she answered, she didn't waste time. "Isaiah, I've got a case for you." "You sound serious." "My daughter." Silence. "Send me the details," she said, "right now." The second call was to a lawyer, a civil rights specialist, based out of Atlanta, someone Isaiah had helped years ago during a military discrimination hearing. She owed him. She didn't hesitate when he asked her to take Amira's case. The third call, that was personal, to a retired federal judge who'd mentored Isaiah through his post-military leadership work. The man picked up on the second ring, and when he heard what happened, he simply said, "Let's make them explain this under oath." By morning, Harmony Falls was already starting to buzz. The video now had 62,000 views. A national education nonprofit had reshared it. So had a civil rights watchdog group. And quietly, the press had started to call. Not just local reporters. Not just the Harmony Falls Gazette. CNN, MSNBC, EVEN, NPR. They all wanted to know who was the girl. And why had she been treated that way? Louise answered the first knock at the door just after 9:00 a.m. It was a young reporter from the street, Louis Sentinel. She was respectful, soft-spoken, and clearly nervous. She asked if they would be willing to share Amira's story. Isaiah stepped in, firm but professional. "We're not releasing a statement yet," he said, "but we will, soon." The reporter nodded and handed him a card. "We're here when you're ready." He closed the door and turned to Louise. "I need to talk to the school. You think they knew?" "They knew she was missing all day. They didn't call me, didn't call you, didn't check in. That's enough." Isaiah changed into a simple button-down shirt and slacks. Even out of uniform, he carried himself like command, never left his bones. He walked into that school like a man on a mission. The front desk secretary gave him a practice smile. "Can I help you?" "Yes. I'm here about my daughter, Amira Bell. She didn't show up for class yesterday, and no one contacted her guardians." The woman blinked. Oh yes, we meant to." "Stop," he said, calm, measured. "You didn't. So now I'm asking why." The principal was called down. Apologies were offered. Excuses made. They said they assumed she was home sick, said they were short-staffed in the office. Isaiah didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "I expect a formal written apology from the school. To Amira and her family," he said. "And I expect your cooperation when federal investigators reach out." "Investigators?" "Yes," he said, already turning toward the door. "You'll be hearing from them." Back at home, Amira sat on the couch, watching the news. She didn't say much, but the look in her eyes was changing. Less fear now. More awareness. She was starting to realize this wasn't just her story anymore. It belonged to more people than she could count. Louise sat beside her and gently squeezed her hand. "You okay, baby?" Amira nodded. "People are sharing it, I know. Do you think They believe me? Louise smiled, just a little. They're feeling you. And that's stronger than belief. Isaiah walked back in and looked at both of them. It's starting, he said. The calls, the questions, the pressure. What now? Amira asked. He kneeled in front of her, looked her straight in the eyes. Now we tell the truth. All of it, loud and clear. And we make sure they can't look away. Outside, the wind shifted through the trees like it knew something was coming. And it was. Because you can only bury a story for so long. But when the father is a general, and the daughter is still standing, that story doesn't stay quiet. It marches. By morning, Harmony Falls had become something it never wanted to be, visible. The story that started on a sidewalk was now on every screen. News anchors were using phrases like unlawful detainment, racial profiling, and abuse of power. Hashtags with Amira's name trended across social media. Civil rights lawyers were already dissecting the 42-second video, like it was a national document. Commentators on Morning Talk shows sat in uncomfortable silence after playing the clip, followed by phrases like disturbing, completely unacceptable, and how does something like this happen in 2025? But Isaiah Bell wasn't interested in the noise. He'd seen how stories can turn into spectacles. He wasn't here to go viral. He wasn't here for 15 minutes of attention. He was here for accountability and justice. So when the first camera crews set up across the street from the Bell home, long lenses peeking over the porch railing, Isaiah stepped outside in a gray shirt and jeans. No fanfare, no press agent, no podium. Just him. And he said 5 words that told the world everything they needed to know. My daughter is not a threat. He didn't take questions. He didn't smile. He went back inside. But that clip? It made the rounds too, because sometimes truth, when spoken plainly, carries louder than shouting. Inside, Amira sat at the kitchen table, watching it all unfold. Louise hovered nearby, trying to stay busy, but unable to stop glancing at the TV every few minutes. Amira wasn't used to this kind of attention. She'd never gone viral, never imagined she'd wake up one day and see her own name in the same headline as brutality. She pulled the knit cap down further over her head, still flinching at the mirror. I don't want them looking at me, she said. Louise turned. They're not looking at you, baby. They're looking at what they did. But it still feels like me in the center of it. Isaiah walked back in and sat across from her. They're not just seeing you now, he said gently. They're seeing every child who's ever been treated like they didn't matter. Every parent who got the call too late. Every voice that got ignored until the cameras came out. Amira looked up. I didn't ask for this. No, Isaiah said. But you survived it. And that makes you more powerful than you know. There was a knock at the door. It wasn't the press this time. It was a representative from the governor's office. Middle-aged, tense, professional smile. She introduced herself and asked for a few moments to speak privately. Isaiah agreed. They sat in the living room while Amira stayed in the kitchen, listening just beyond the archway. We want to assure you that the state is taking this very seriously, the woman said. An independent investigation is being launched into the Harmony Falls Police Department. Isaiah nodded. Good, but I'm not here for promises. I'm here for consequences. You'll have cooperation. I want full transparency. We're committed to it. He stared at her for a beat longer than was comfortable. And I want every second of security footage from inside that station, especially the room they took her into. The woman hesitated, then nodded. I'll make the call. Amira listened, still gripping the cup of tea Louise had made her 2 hours earlier. It had gone cold, but she held it anyway, like it grounded her in something still warm. Her story was out now. And the world was watching. But the town, the people who passed her in the grocery store, her classmates, that was a different story. That day, Isaiah made the choice to keep her home from school. Not because she was hiding, but because she deserved rest. She deserved to heal before returning to hallways filled with stares and whispers. Across town, At the Harmony Falls Police Department, the atmosphere had changed. The phones rang nonstop. Reporters camped outside, and inside, behind closed doors, panic had set in. Chief Lyle Garrison, a man who hadn't worn a uniform in 10 years but still insisted everyone call him Chief, paced behind his desk, sweat beading at his temples. He barked orders to his deputy, demanded statements be drafted, insisted they had to control the narrative. But the narrative was already gone. It belonged to the public now. Officer Chad Morton, the man at the center of it all, was nowhere to be seen. Officially, he'd been placed on administrative leave. Unofficially, he was hiding. And the rest of the department knew something was coming. Because when a two-star general's daughter gets humiliated by your officer on video, people notice. Federal investigators had already sent over requests for internal memos, officer complaints, and disciplinary records. Whispers began about patterns of misconduct, about other kids, about things that had been swept under the rug. And the rug was lifting. Meanwhile, Isaiah wasn't waiting. That evening, he sat with Amira and asked if she was ready. Ready for what? She asked. To speak. To who? To everyone. She hesitated, then nodded slowly. Okay. The interview was filmed in their living room. No fancy studio. No lights. Just Amira, seated beside her father, her hands in her lap, her voice steady. She didn't cry. She didn't shout. She told the truth. About the sidewalk, the cuffs, the cold metal chair, the buzzing clippers, the silence that followed. And when she finished, she looked into the camera and said one sentence, "No kid should ever be treated like I was, especially not for just walking to school." That clip went viral in under an hour. And this time, no one looked away. By the end of the week, Amira Bell wasn't just a name in a headline anymore. She was a face, a voice, a daughter, a child. And for millions of Americans watching, she became a symbol of all the quiet, sanctioned violence that too often hides behind badges, closed doors, and silence. The clip of her interview had racked up over 5 million views. Local news stations played it on repeat. National networks aired it during prime time. And across social media, people didn't just repost it, they felt it. Because she hadn't screamed. She hadn't pointed fingers. She had looked into the lens with her soft, wounded voice and told the world, no kid should ever be treated like I was, especially not for just walking to school. And that truth, in its simplicity, hit harder than anything else could. By Saturday morning, everything had changed. A statement was released by the Harmony Falls Police Department, 2 paragraphs of vague, legally curated language that said all the wrong things. We acknowledge the public's concern regarding the recent incident involving a local student. At this time, we are cooperating fully with state authorities as part of an internal review. No mention of Amira, no apology, no responsibility. It was like trying to put out a wildfire with a paper fan. Within hours, the statement was shredded online. Former prosecutors, civil rights attorneys, school administrators, and even military generals began weighing in publicly. One retired judge on CNN said, "If even half of what this child describes is true, it represents one of the clearest abuses of power I've seen in recent years." Civil rights icon Dr. Lillian Webb reposted Amira's clip with the caption, "We failed another child. Again. Let this one be the last." Celebrities began tagging each other with the hashtag #JusticeForAmira. Late-night hosts dedicated monologues. A major national newspaper published an editorial titled, "The Braids They Cut Were Our Nation's Shame." The public was no longer curious, they were outraged. And behind the scenes, the Department of Justice had moved quietly but firmly into action. 2 agents arrived in Harmony Falls early Sunday morning. They didn't wear suits. They didn't knock loudly. They walked into the station with badges and federal subpoenas in hand. Within the hour, every piece of internal video footage from the day of Amira's detainment was under federal review. It didn't take long. The footage didn't lie. They saw the hallway. They saw the chair. They saw the clippers. They saw how Morton pinned her shoulders while Officer Marks stood by, silent and still. They saw Amira sobbing as her braids fell around her lap. They saw it all. And there was no misunderstanding. There was no incident. It was abuse, plain and simple. Back at the Bell home, Isaiah stood in the living room with a federal agent named Rhodes, a quiet man in his 50s, with tired eyes and a folder tucked under his arm. Rhodes didn't sugarcoat it. "I've reviewed the footage," he said. "It's worse than what she described." Isaiah didn't flinch. He just nodded once. "So what happens now?" "We're recommending immediate disciplinary action and opening a federal civil rights case." "Against Morton?" "Yes. And Marks. And possibly Chief Garrison, if we find evidence of obstruction." Louise sat on the couch, listening, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Amira, beside her, was silent. She already knew the footage existed, but hearing someone else say it out loud made it real all over again. Rhodes looked at Amira. "You're brave," he said softly. "And what you did, speaking up, it matters. More than you know." She didn't say anything, but she nodded, and that was enough. Outside, reporters had tripled. Protesters now lined the sidewalks with signs that read "Protect Black Children," "Stop Shaving Our Daughters," and "Braids are not contraband." The town square was full of angry voices, young and old, black and white, students, teachers, veterans, parents, and, at the center of it all, silence from the people in power. Because Chief Garrison had gone dark. No interviews, no press conference, no response. Inside the station, morale crumbled. Officers whispered in corners. Some filed internal complaints. One anonymously told a journalist, "This isn't new, it's just the first time someone caught it." As pressure mounted, the city council called an emergency meeting. The room was packed. Isaiah was there. So was Amira, wearing a gray head wrap, her back straight, her eyes forward. The mayor tried to control the room, but the energy was electric volatile. Speakers came up, one after another. A schoolteacher who had known Amira since kindergarten. A retired Marine who said, "If that was my granddaughter, this town wouldn't have to wonder what justice looks like." A teenager who said, "I walk that same street every day. I carry a trumpet case. I always wonder if they think it's a gun." When Isaiah finally stood, the room fell still. He didn't yell. He didn't slam the podium. He just spoke. "When I served this country, I did so knowing there were risks. But I never imagined one of the greatest threats to my daughter would come not from war, but from people paid to protect her." He paused, let the weight settle. This is not about bad apples. This is about systems that protect them. This is about leadership that turns a blind eye while children are humiliated. And this moment is your chance to prove you're more than that. Applause erupted. Some people stood, others wept. That night, the mayor issued a second, more serious statement. The city would begin an independent audit of the Harmony Falls Police Department. Chief Garrison was placed on immediate suspension pending investigation. Officer Morton's badge was revoked. Officer Marks was placed under formal review, but none of it made Amira's hair grow back. None of it gave her that morning on the sidewalk back. None of it fixed the shaking hands, the sleepless nights, the quiet moments she now feared. But it was a beginning, and for the first time in a week, Amira felt like maybe the world hadn't forgotten her. Not this time. By the time Monday rolled around, the name Amira Bell wasn't just trending, it was galvanizing. She was no longer a story, she was a cause, a movement, a reckoning that had people marching outside courthouses in cities she'd never even visited. From Oakland to Boston, Baltimore to Chicago, crowds gathered with signs, songs, and chants, many of them led by young girls who looked just like her, hair wrapped, fists raised, voices steady. Each one carrying their own version of what it meant to be seen, to be silenced, to be called dangerous when all they were doing was walking to school. And back in Harmony Falls, Isaiah Bell was still moving like a man with no time to waste. He didn't trust promises made behind closed doors. He'd spent a career watching bureaucracies stall and stumble, hoping the clock would run out before the truth found air. So while the headlines blared and the hashtags burned, Isaiah worked the phones. He had the kind of contacts most people didn't even know existed. Quiet names, real power. The kind of people who didn't flinch when you said words like civil rights violation, internal corruption, or federal neglect. At 6:15 a.m., he called a woman named Elizabeth Shaw, head of oversight, at the Civil Rights Division of the DOJ. She answered on the first ring. "We're monitoring the case," she said. "We've been watching since the first video surfaced." "I want more than monitoring," Isaiah replied. "You're going to get it." By 9:00 a.m., an official DOJ task force had been assigned. By noon, they had access to 10 years of Harmony Falls PD internal records. Patterns began to emerge. Complaints, settlements, names that repeated. Youths stopped without cause. Minority students cited for disturbances that white students were let off for. A filing from 2019 where a 13-year-old was handcuffed after bringing a plastic science kit to school because it looked suspicious. It was a culture, not just an incident. And Isaiah knew exposing culture took more than anger. It took structure, documentation, legal pressure, media leverage, a relentless refusal to let the machine lull the public back to sleep. So that's what he built. In a span of 48 hours, he helped form a legal coalition called the Bell Project, made up of lawyers, educators, child psychologists, and police reform advocates. Their first demand? Immediate statewide legislation banning forced hair alterations on minors without parental consent. The second? An external civilian oversight board for small-town police departments statewide. The third? That every officer involved in Amira's detainment and assault face not only administrative review, but federal charges where applicable. The governor hadn't expected this. Neither had the mayor. But Isaiah didn't care. He wasn't here for press conferences or photo ops. He wasn't here to raise awareness. He was here to hold the system accountable, and he was doing it in real time. Meanwhile, Amira stayed home, mostly quiet, still healing. Some days she barely left her room. Others, she played her violin for hours without speaking a word. She didn't want pity. She didn't want praise. She just wanted the noise to stop, the weight to lift. But something else was beginning to take shape inside her too. Something she couldn't quite name yet. Strength. Not loud, marching in the streets strength. Quieter, like a seed pushing up through cracked concrete. Louise noticed it first. The way Amira began reading articles about black women in history. The way she started writing in her journal again. And one afternoon, while dusting the old bookshelf in the hallway, Louise found a sheet of paper tucked behind the family Bible. It was a speech, handwritten, titled, "What They'd Tried to Take." Louise didn't read it. She didn't need to. She just smiled, folded it back carefully, and left it where she found it. Because sometimes the voice that was stolen begins to return long before it's spoken out loud again. Across the country, school districts began reviewing their own disciplinary policies. One superintendent in Michigan cited Amira's case while announcing a new student rights initiative. A group of black mothers in Georgia held a town hall called Protect Our Girls. Even a high-ranking official in the National Association of School Resource Officers resigned after acknowledging that too many in our ranks have treated children like threats first and students second. Isaiah watched it all from the corner of the living room, arms folded. He didn't smile, but his chest rose, just slightly, because now they couldn't unsee it. And the beautiful, aching truth? None of this would have happened if Amira hadn't stood still that day on the sidewalk, if she hadn't placed her violin case down gently, if she hadn't trusted her voice, even as it trembled. The world was moving because of her. And the best part, she was just getting started. By the second week, the cracks inside the Harmony Falls Police Department had turned into fractures. From the outside, the building still looked the same white brick, tinted windows, a rusted flagpole out front, but inside, it felt like a dam under pressure, each minute pushing harder than the last. The phones never stopped ringing. Emails poured in. Reporters circled like hawks. Protesters grew louder outside, not angrier, but more unrelenting. But it wasn't the outside noise that worried the department most. It was the silence within. People had started talking, not to each other, to the feds, to lawyers, to reporters. Not everyone, but enough. Enough to rattle Chief Garrison, who sat in his office with the blinds drawn and the TV muted. He didn't speak to the press, didn't speak to the mayor, barely spoke to his own staff. He walked in late, left early, kept a folder of printed talking points on his desk, but rarely touched them. He was hoping this would pass, but it wouldn't, because this wasn't about spin anymore. It was about truth. And truth, once loose, doesn't go back in the box. The first to speak up was Officer David Nguyen, a beat cop with 9 years on the force. A young father, quiet type, the kind who never made waves. But he couldn't look his daughter in the eye anymore without seeing Amira's face. He didn't come forward with a press release. He didn't stand on a podium. He walked into the federal investigator's temporary office and asked to talk. He brought reports, emails, body cam logs, a timeline of ignored complaints that stretched back years. The DOJ agents listened. They took notes. And quietly, they opened a second file. Internal Misconduct Pattern, Harmony Falls PD. A day later, an anonymous voicemail landed in the inbox of a local journalist. Female voice. Shaky. "I was in the room when they shaved her head," it said. "I was told not to intervene, that it was standard. But it wasn't. It wasn't." The journalist traced it to a department clerical worker. She didn't want her name used, but she gave details. Dates. Names. Internal memos marked sensitive. Disciplinary records altered after the fact. It wasn't just Morton anymore. It wasn't just Marks. This went higher, wider. Amira's case had become a door, and behind it were things the town had tried to keep hidden for years. Isaiah Bell knew it. So did the mayor. So did the state attorney general, who now had 3 separate teams reviewing Harmony Falls' use of force records. Back at the Bell home, the pressure was being felt in a different way, because as the world pressed forward, Amira was still trying to hold herself together. Every headline felt like a weight. Every interview request chipped at her resolve. But she also felt something else rising inside her, something hard to name. It wasn't rage, not quite. It was closer to resolve. She still hadn't returned to school. The district offered to send a counselor. Louise politely declined. Amira didn't need someone to pat her on the back. She needed space and music. So she played. Every morning, every night. She played until her fingers ached and her shoulders sagged from the effort. The violin became her voice again, and Isaiah noticed. "You've got something to say," he told her. She nodded. "But I want to say it my way." So she began writing. A speech, yes, but also music. She called it Reclaimed. It started soft, almost like sadness. Then it rose, grew, climbed into something louder, proud, undeniable. Isaiah asked if she was ready to share it. She wasn't sure. But then, something happened that changed her mind. A teacher from her school reached out. She'd seen the video, heard the speech. And she wasn't calling with sympathy, she was calling with an invitation. The state's Youth Leadership Summit was hosting an event in Street Louis. They wanted Amira to perform, not as a victim, as a voice, as a creator, a force. Amira hesitated, then said yes. Back at the police department, Chief Garrison faced his own reckoning. The city council had demanded his presence at a public hearing. It wasn't optional. It wasn't private. And when he arrived, 2 officers by his side, no uniform, just a gray suit that didn't fit right. The room was already packed. Reporters lined the walls. Community leaders sat front row. Isaiah was there. So was Amira. This time, she didn't hide behind her cap. She wore her head wrap proudly. Her back was straight, her eyes unflinching. And when the floor opened for public comment, she stood. Silence fell. She walked to the mic, took a breath, then spoke. "You called me suspicious, dangerous, a threat. You put me in a cell. You took my hair, but you didn't take my voice." Every word hung in the air like a note played too perfectly to ignore. Garrison didn't look at her. He kept his eyes down, because what was left to say? The crowd applauded. Slowly at first, then louder. And for the first time in weeks, Amira smiled, not big, just enough. Because now, the silence wasn't hers to carry anymore. It was theirs. The invitation to perform at the state's youth summit wasn't just an opportunity, it was a test. For Amira, it meant standing in front of strangers again, letting her music speak for her when words felt too small. It meant showing the world not just what had happened to her, but who she still was. Her first instinct was to say no. The idea of walking onto a stage, lights glaring, people staring, all of them expecting something, it made her stomach twist into knots. But there was something else too, something she couldn't shake. It was the memory of that cold metal chair, the feeling of clippers buzzing behind her, the helplessness of sitting there with her voice swallowed by fear. And she realized if she didn't stand now, if she didn't lift herself out of that moment, they would have taken more than just her hair. They would have taken her name, her dignity, her power. So she said yes. She would perform. She would play the piece she had written in the days after the arrest reclaimed. A song without lyrics, but full of everything she hadn't yet said. Pain, defiance, grace. Isaiah helped arrange the travel. Louise packed her clothes, 3 outfits, all in soft tones, none of them apologetic. A new scarf, her polished shoes, and a fresh journal placed quietly in the side pocket of her bag. Amira rode most of the way in silence. The road, from Harmony Falls to Street, Louis wound through fields and forests, past faded gas stations and small-town diners with names like Joe's Grill and Tammy's Kitchen. She stared out the window, watching the trees blur. "Scared?" Isaiah asked gently. Amira nodded once. "Good," he said. "Means you care." When they arrived at the hotel, a staffer from the summit greeted them with a badge and a folder. "You've got rehearsal at 4, sound check at 5. And you'll be closing the second half of the program." "Closing?" Amira blinked. The staffer smiled. "Yes, they want you to have the last word." Amira didn't respond, not because she didn't have anything to say, but because she suddenly realized she did. Back in Harmony Falls, the pressure on the police department had reached a new level. Federal investigators had confirmed a total of 13 complaints filed in the last 5 years involving excessive force against minors. 5 of those incidents included students of color. None had resulted in internal discipline. That morning, the DOJ officially announced a formal civil rights investigation into the entire department. Chief Garrison was suspended indefinitely. Officer Morton had retained a private attorney, and Officer Marks, the silent observer in the room that day, had submitted a resignation letter citing personal health concerns. But it was too late. The system was already cracking. At City Hall, town council members were scrambling to pass last-minute reforms, youth advisory boards, policy reviews, sensitivity training. But none of it impressed the people marching in the streets. Because change written in panic doesn't feel like justice. It feels like survival. And the town was finally realizing it had run out of places to hide. Meanwhile, Amira stood alone in the wings of a theater with red velvet curtains and spotlights overhead. The auditorium buzzed with murmurs, shuffling programs, folding seats creaking as people sat down. She took a deep breath. Then another. Her violin rested against her shoulder. When they called her name, she stepped into the light. The room hushed. It wasn't just a crowd. It was a sea of strangers waiting to see what a survivor sounds like. Amira didn't speak. Not yet. She simply raised her bow and played. The first note was soft, wounded. Then came the swell, bitterness hidden beneath harmony, resistance cloaked in melody. There were parts where it nearly broke, trembled, wavered. But it never fell apart. Because just when it felt like too much, the rhythm shifted, and it rose. Louder, stronger, until the final measure landed like a truth no one could deny. When she finished, the silence held for 3 full seconds. Then the room erupted. It wasn't polite applause. It was a standing ovation. From the back row to the front aisle, every hand clapped. Every eye glistened. Every heart knew it had witnessed something more than a performance. It had witnessed reclamation. Afterward, a local journalist approached her backstage. "I've heard hundreds of performances in my career," she said, "but that wasn't music. That was memory. That was justice." Amira didn't know what to say, so she just smiled and nodded. She'd done what she came to do. She had taken the worst day of her life and turned it into a moment no one would forget. The next morning, video of her performance went online. Within 24 hours, it had over 2 million views. People called it a battle cry in strings, a musical testimony. One headline read, "She didn't need words, just a bow, a violin, and her truth." Meanwhile, Isaiah fielded calls from news networks, policy advocates, even senators asking for his insight on police reform legislation. But he stayed grounded, because this wasn't about politics. It was about his daughter, the girl with the shaved head, the trembling voice, the unwavering spirit, the one who refused to let fear become her home. And back in Harmony Falls, something strange started to happen. The silence, the same silence that had once let everything happen, began to speak. White residents who had once looked away started asking hard questions. Teachers wrote letters demanding accountability from their administrators. And a group of high school students organized a town-wide forum called Voices We Missed. Because they knew now, the only thing more dangerous than speaking up was staying quiet. And Amira? She had found her voice. She had held the world in her silence. And then, when she was ready, she had released it. One note at a time. The headlines shifted from questions to consequences. By the middle of the month, the Justice Department had released its first findings. The language wasn't dramatic. It didn't need to be. It was precise, clinical, damning. The Harmony Falls Police Department failed to follow constitutional protocols in its handling of minors, exhibited a pattern of discriminatory behavior, and violated the civil rights of Amira Bell during her unlawful detainment. One sentence. But it changed everything. The federal government had spoken, and now the town had to answer. The first to fall was Officer Chad Morton, indicted on 3 counts: civil rights violation under color of law, excessive use of force on a minor, and unlawful detainment. He was arrested quietly, no cameras, no spectacle. But the image of his mugshot leaked within an hour. The same jawline that once towered over Amira on the sidewalk now looked smaller under fluorescent jailhouse lights. His bail was denied. The second was Officer Tracy Marks. She wasn't charged criminally yet, but she was formally disqualified from holding law enforcement certification in the state of Missouri. Her resignation became permanent. The department issued a third statement, this one longer, more apologetic, but still empty. The Harmony Falls Police Department deeply regrets the trauma caused and is committed to rebuilding trust. But trust wasn't a memo. Trust was broken. And everyone knew it. Chief Garrison was last. His termination was swift. The city council voted unanimously after internal memos revealed he had received multiple warnings about Morton's behavior over the years and ignored them. One memo, dated just 9 months prior, had a line circled in red ink. Concerns raised about Officer Morton's aggressive treatment of students walking near school property. The chief had signed the report with a single word: handled. That word would come back to haunt him, because now he would have to explain it in front of a federal judge. But even as justice moved forward slowly, imperfectly, Amira remained quiet. She watched it all unfold on television, phone in hand, tea untouched beside her. Louise had started cooking more again, meals that brought warmth back into the house. Isaiah answered calls from legal teams, advocacy groups, education boards. The house became a small command center. But Amira, she stayed in her lane, focused, steady. And one afternoon, as sunlight streamed through the living room window, she asked a question. Is it bad that I don't feel happy about it? Isaiah looked up from his notes. About what? Morton. The charges, the attention, the people cheering. I thought I'd feel better. But I don't. Isaiah set his pen down and leaned back in the chair. Justice isn't joy, baby. It's just weight being moved off your chest. Slowly. One brick at a time. Amira thought about that, then nodded. Because she could feel the weight. Still there, just lighter. And she wasn't alone. Letters came daily now. Handwritten notes, packages. A mural of her was painted near a middle school in Philadelphia. One little girl sent a drawing of a violin with hearts around it and wrote, "You are my hero." Amira hung it on her wall, not because she believed it, but because one day, maybe she would. Outside, Harmony Falls changed too. The protests quieted, but the energy stayed. The town voted to create its first ever community review board. A group of high school seniors launched a podcast about student rights. And in a twist no one saw coming, Tariq, the teen who first filmed the arrest, was awarded a regional journalism prize for his courage. When he received the award, he said, "All I did was press record. She did everything else." He dedicated it to Amira. She didn't go to the ceremony, but she watched it, alone. And when he said her name, she smiled, just barely, because something inside her was shifting. She had carried so much, not just the moment, but the aftermath. And now, as the dust settled, she was left standing in the stillness of what came next. Not fear, not rage, but choice. What to do with this story? What to build with the pieces they hadn't broken? Because the girl they thought they could silence was still here. And the echoes of her voice? They were just getting started. Amira Bell never asked to become a symbol. She didn't audition for this spotlight. She didn't sign up to be the name in headlines, or the face on murals, or the voice in viral speeches. She was a girl who loved music, who walked to school, who wanted to play first chair at state finals and make her grandma proud. But sometimes, when the world cracks open beneath your feet, you either fall or you grow. And Amira was starting to realize she had grown, not taller, not older, but inward, stronger, quietly. She still didn't like cameras, still felt her stomach twist whenever someone she didn't know said her name in public. But she had begun to carry herself differently, straighter, grounded, like someone who had seen the storm and survived it. She played her violin almost every morning now, not just to practice, but to center herself. The same melody she once wrote in the dark reclaimed had become something new. She started adding to it, new bars, new phrases. It was no longer a piece about what was taken. It was about what endured. One afternoon, while she was practicing in the living room, Isaiah walked in with a letter in hand. Not an envelope, a formal packet, crisp paper, gold emblem on the seal. He handed it to her without saying anything. She looked up at him, then opened it. It was from the White House, an official invitation to perform at a special event commemorating the 70th anniversary of Brown v. Board of Education. The president would be there. Civil rights leaders, teachers, students, survivors. It would be televised, broadcast nationwide. They wanted her to close the event with her piece. Isaiah watched her reaction. She didn't smile, didn't cry. She just stared at the page, then whispered, "Why me?" He sat beside her. "Because you lived it, because you didn't let them take your light, and because sometimes history needs a new voice to remind people it's not over." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded. "I'll go." Word spread quickly. Reporters reached out again. Local news wanted statements. But this time, Amira didn't feel overwhelmed. She wasn't hiding. She simply said, "I'll speak with my music." 2 weeks later, she stood in a white dress at the back entrance of Constitution Hall in Washington, D.C. The building buzzed with energy. A brass band rehearsed in one corner. Security swept the halls. Cameramen adjusted tripods. Behind the curtain, voices murmured and organizers shuffled papers, adjusting the run of show. Amira waited in the green room with her violin case in her lap. Louise sat beside her, holding her hand. "You okay, baby?" she asked. Amira took a breath. "Yeah, I think I am." "You don't have to be perfect. Just be true." "I will." Isaiah entered a moment later, wearing a charcoal suit, eyes kind but steady. "They're ready for you," he said. And just like that, it was time. She walked alone to the edge of the stage. She could feel the weight of every footstep. Not fear, just gravity. The curtain rose. The audience rose too. Not because of protocol, because they already knew who she was and what she had survived. The announcer's voice echoed across the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Miss Amira Bell." She didn't bow, didn't wave. She simply lifted her violin and began. The first note rang out clear and slow, like breath after a long silence. Then came the build. Low strings climbing toward hope. Melodies that twisted around sorrow and rose above it. Moments where the music pulled back, tender and soft, almost whispering before returning with power. People didn't cough, didn't shift in their seats. They leaned in, listened, felt. Near the end, she paused, just for a beat. And then, with eyes closed, played the final passage. A flurry of sound. Then stillness. Then peace. When the last note faded, she lowered her bow and opened her eyes. The room stood in stunned silence. And then applause. Louder than anything she'd ever heard. Not polite, not expected. Earned. Somewhere near the front row, the president stood and clapped. So did the first lady. So did a room full of strangers who would never see Amira the same way again. Afterward, she was escorted backstage, where cameras flashed and microphones hovered. But she didn't speak to them. Not yet. She sat with Louise and Isaiah and said, "I just want to go outside for a minute." They walked with her through the back hallway and out into the cool spring air. A breeze passed through the cherry blossoms, and for a moment, everything was quiet again. Just them. Just peace. Amira looked up at the sky. "I feel different," she said. Isaiah nodded. "You are." Louise kissed her forehead. "They tried to cut your crown, baby, but they forgot you were born with one they can't reach." And Amira finally smiled. Big this time. Real. Because she believed it. Not just that she had survived, but that she was becoming. Not a headline. Not a victim. A voice. A creator. A reminder that even in the smallest towns, with the quietest girls, there are revolutions waiting to be born. And sometimes, all it takes is one note held long enough to change everything. When Amira stepped off the train back in Harmony Falls, the world didn't feel smaller. It felt quieter. The streets looked the same. The sidewalks hadn't shifted. The mailboxes still leaned at odd angles, and the grocery store still displayed bananas in the same sagging basket out front. But everything felt different. Maybe it wasn't the town that had changed. Maybe it was her. Isaiah carried her bag while Louise fussed with her scarf, making sure it stayed tucked under her coat collar. The wind had picked up again, cool and whispering, the kind of spring breeze that hinted at summer but didn't commit. They didn't speak much on the ride home. No need. They had lived so many lifetimes inside the last few weeks. Words sometimes just got in the way. When they pulled into the driveway, Amira saw something waiting on the porch. A note, taped to the door. Written in blue marker on plain notebook paper, it read, "Thank you for giving us courage." No name, no signature. Just the words. Louise pulled it off and read it again. "People are watching you, baby." Not to judge, to follow. Inside, the house smelled like something familiar: wood polish and sage. Louise had cleaned before they left. Fresh sheets, new flowers in the living room. The same family photos still lined the walls, but they felt richer now. Like the eyes in the frames were proud of what had been done. Amira set her violin down in her bedroom, took off her coat, and just stood in front of the mirror for a moment. She studied herself, not the hair, not the scars, not the headlines, but the stillness in her own eyes. It wasn't the stillness of fear anymore. It was clarity. Later that night, She and Isaiah took a slow walk through town. The sun had gone down, and the storefronts glowed gently from within. A few cars passed. A few neighbors nodded. Some even stopped. "Glad you're back," one man said outside the hardware store. "Thank you for standing up," said a woman. Amira didn't recognize. Some waved but didn't speak. Others watched but looked away when she glanced back. Not everyone was ready, and that was okay. Progress doesn't knock on every door at once. When they reached the edge of Main Street, Isaiah gestured toward the corner where it all began, the place where Officer Morton had stopped her, where the sidewalk had felt like quicksand. Someone had left a single sunflower in a mason jar beside the fire hydrant. Amira didn't say anything. She just stood there, letting the breeze move through her. This was the same concrete, the same cracks. But the fear didn't live here anymore, not in her. Back at the house, Louise was sitting in her rocker, knitting something with calm, slow hands. The news played softly, in the background. Another police department, this time in another state, was under investigation for its treatment of a black student. The anchor said, "Inspired by recent calls for reform after the case of Amira Bell." Louise shook her head with a small smile. "Look at you, changing the whole country and still making it home in time for dinner." Amira sat beside her. "What if it fades?" she asked. "The noise, the attention. What if people just move on?" "They will," Louise said. "They always do. But you won't. And that's what matters." Amira leaned her head on her grandmother's shoulder. The night air wrapped around them gently. The next morning she returned to school. There were no reporters now, no chants, no crowds, just lockers slamming, laughter in hallways, students in hoodies and headphones, teachers holding coffee cups like lifelines, and then silence brief and awkward when Amira stepped through the door. She didn't flinch. She walked to her locker, spun the dial, opened it. Inside was a small envelope. On the front, Amira. She opened it slowly. Inside was a single sentence. "You taught us what brave looks like." No name, but that didn't matter. Because she knew now that real change doesn't always look like fireworks or parades. Sometimes it's a note in a locker, a flower by a hydrant, a girl walking through a hallway that once felt like a trap, now walking like it belongs to her. She wasn't done healing. The nightmares still came sometimes. The shame still visited her in waves, unexpected and uninvited. But now, she had something louder than all of that. She had voice, she had music, and she had a memory that would never again belong to them, because she'd rewritten it, step by step, note by note. The knock came just after 4 p.m. It was soft 3 taps, hesitant, like the person on the other side wasn't sure they belonged there. Amira had just finished practicing. Her violin was resting on her bed, and she still had the bow in her hand when she heard it. Louise was folding towels in the laundry room. Isaiah was on the back porch, reading a report on new civil rights policies. So it was Amira who answered the door. A girl stood there, maybe 12, thin, nervous. Hair in tight coils pulled back with a pink scrunchie. She wore a hoodie too big for her and held a notebook tight to her chest like it was armor. She didn't speak right away. She just stared. Amira gave her a small, cautious smile. "Hey." The girl blinked, then cleared her throat. I'm sorry for showing up. I live 2 blocks over. My name's Keisha." Amira nodded. "It's okay." Keisha's eyes flicked to the violin case visible through the open door. "You're her, right?" "The girl. The one from the video. I'm Amira." The girl nodded. "I know." Then, with trembling fingers, she reached into her hoodie pocket and pulled out a crumpled flyer. It was from her school, a disciplinary notice. She handed it to Amira without a word. Amira unfolded it and read, Keisha had been suspended for disruption of classroom activities. No physical contact, no cursing, just talking back. She looked up. What happened? Keisha shifted from foot to foot. "My teacher said my hair wasn't too much for school pictures. Said it would cast shadows on my face and make the lighting weird. I told her I wasn't going to straighten it. She said I was being disrespectful. I got sent to the office." Amira didn't flinch. She'd heard versions of this story 100 times since everything happened. People emailed, DMED, stopped her in grocery stores. This happened to me, too. They made me feel wrong. I thought I was alone. Keisha took a breath. I saw your video. I watched it like 10 times. I wrote something too. She held up her notebook. Can I show you? Amira stepped back. Come in. The girl walked slowly through the doorway, her fingers never leaving the notebook. In the living room, she sat on the edge of the couch, still clutching it, as if letting go would make the words disappear. Amira sat across from her. You don't have to read it out loud. You can just show me. Keisha opened it and flipped to the middle. Handwritten, pages of it. A poem. It was raw, clumsy in spots, heartbreaking in others. Lines like, they told me my voice was too loud for someone so small, and they called my curls defiant. I call them mine. When she finished, she looked up with wide eyes, waiting for judgment. But Amira didn't critique it. She didn't point out the grammar or structure. She just said, it's beautiful. Keisha's face crumpled in disbelief. Really? Yes, Amira said, because it's yours. And they can't take that. The girl's shoulders dropped for the first time since she walked in. Then she said something Amira wasn't ready for. I want to be brave like you. Amira looked down for a second. Because she still didn't always feel brave. She still had bad days. Days she woke up afraid of walking down the street alone. Days she avoided her own reflection. But she realized something in that moment. Maybe bravery wasn't about never feeling scared. Maybe it was about standing up anyway, especially when, someone else is watching. So she looked Keisha in the eyes and said, You already are. The girl's lips parted, like she wanted to cry but didn't want to in front of someone she admired. Amira stood and walked to the bookshelf. She pulled out a blank leather journal, one Louise had given her months ago, but she never used. She handed it to Keisha. For the rest of your poems, because there'll be more. The girl held it like a sacred thing. Then she hugged Amira, tight, no words, just warmth. That night, after Keisha left and the house was quiet again, Amira sat with her own journal. She didn't write a song. She wrote a letter, not to Keisha, to every girl like her. She titled it, To the Ones Who Don't Know Yet That They Matter. It began with, I used to think I had to wait until someone else said I mattered, that I had to be small to stay safe. But they were wrong, and so was I. You matter right now, as you are. She didn't know where she would share it, or if she even needed to, but it was there, and that was enough. The next morning, she opened her email and found something unexpected. It was from a nonprofit group in Chicago, Girls Write Loud, an organization that mentors young writers from underrepresented communities. They'd read about her performance, watched her speeches, and they were inviting her to speak at a summer retreat as a guest artist, not just to perform, but to lead, to teach. Amira stared at the screen for a long time, then smiled, because maybe that was what healing looked like. Not forgetting, not pretending, but becoming the kind of person she needed when she was sitting in that holding room, alone and afraid. Now she wasn't alone, and she would make sure no one else had to be either. Chicago didn't feel like home. It was louder, faster, messier than Harmony Falls. But in a way, that made it easier. The city didn't expect her to smile at everyone, didn't expect her to explain what had happened. It let her be just another girl in a coat and scarf, walking down the street with her violin case slung across her back. But she wasn't just another girl anymore, not to the people waiting for her. The Girls Write Loud retreat was held in a big old brick schoolhouse turned art center just outside the city. The building smelled like wood and chalk and hope. Inside, walls were covered in posters of past speakers, poets, artists, activists. A mural stretched across the main hallway, painted in bold strokes. Speak so loud they have to listen. Amira walked past it, with her heart thudding steady in her chest. She didn't know what to expect. She wasn't a teacher. She wasn't a leader. But these girls, they were expecting something from her. They had heard her music, seen her face, watched her stand before thousands and hold the room in silence. And now they sat cross-legged in a circle, eyes wide, journals open, waiting for her to speak. She took a deep breath and sat down on the floor with them. No stage, no microphone, just her voice. "My name is Amira Bell," she said. "And for a long time, I didn't think I was allowed to take up space." They were quiet, leaning in. I thought silence kept me safe. Until I found out silence can also be a cage. A few girls nodded. Others wrote in their notebooks without looking up. That day, Amira led a workshop called Words They Told Me One Couldn't Say. Each girl wrote a list of things they'd been told not to speak aloud, things like, "You're too emotional. Your hair is distracting. Why are you always so loud? You should smile more. My body doesn't belong to me," they wrote in silence. And then, slowly, they began to read. One by one, they spoke words that had once been used to shrink them and reclaim them as truths. By the end of the day, the floor was covered in pages. Amira sat back against the wall and realized something she hadn't allowed herself to admit. She needed this just as much as they did. That night, back in her dorm room, she couldn't sleep. Her roommate, a girl from New Orleans, who had written a piece about her brother's arrest, had drifted off hours ago. But Amira lay there, staring at the ceiling, hearing echoes from the past. The clippers, the cuffs, the silence. There was one part of herself she hadn't faced yet. Not in interviews, not in music, not even in the letter she wrote for the girls back home. She hadn't spoken to the version of her who had sat in that cold room, head down, tears hot on her cheeks, her scalp raw. So she sat up, reached for her journal, and wrote. She didn't write for the world. She didn't write to post. She wrote to her, the girl who had been shaved, who had been stripped down and left to feel like nothing. She wrote, "I'm sorry they made you feel less than human. I'm sorry they didn't see your light. I promise I see it now. You're not weak. You survived. And I won't pretend that moment didn't matter. But I won't let it define you anymore either." The pen trembled in her hand, but the words didn't stop. When she was done, she closed the journal and exhaled. She hadn't cried in weeks, but she did then, not from pain, from release. The next morning, she walked into the final session with something different in her eyes. She played her violin again, but not reclaimed. This time, it was something new, a piece she hadn't named yet. It had parts of the old melody, the ache, the climb, but also something freer, lighter. It danced more, laughed more, forgave more. And when the last note faded, she looked around the room full of girls and said, "I used to think surviving was enough. Now I know thriving is the real justice." Applause came slowly, then louder. And then a girl in the back raised her hand. Her name was Nyla, 11, tiny voice, big eyes. She asked, "How do you stop being afraid of your own story?" Amira smiled. "You don't," she said. "You just tell it anyway." Afterward, they hugged, all of them, like a ripple of connection that wrapped around the room and held them close. That night, Amira sat by the window of her dorm and looked out at the Chicago skyline. Lights blinked in patterns across the horizon. Cars zipped below. Somewhere, people were shouting at traffic, falling in love, writing songs, slamming doors, whispering prayers. The world kept moving, but she wasn't just being carried by it anymore. She was shaping it. And for the first time since that day on the sidewalk, she felt whole. Not healed all the way, not free from memory, but whole. Because she had turned the sharpest part of her pain into a lantern, and now others were following its light. A year later, almost to the day, Amira Bell stood at the edge of Main Street in Harmony Falls, staring at the same square of concrete where everything had changed. The sidewalk looked no different. The fire hydrant was still chipped. The storefronts hadn't been repainted. The small crack in the curb still curled like a question mark just beneath the post office sign. But Amira had changed, and because of her, the world around this small corner of Missouri had changed too. Behind her, the town square buzzed with a soft energy. Not loud, not crowded, just present. Families milled about. Kids chased one another. A mural now stretched across the brick wall across from the courthouse painted by local students. It showed a girl with coils of dark hair like music notes, holding a violin, her eyes wide open. At the bottom, in bold black letters, it read, "They tried to quiet her. Instead, she played louder." Amira took a breath. She still hadn't decided if she liked it being immortalized like that. Part of her wanted to hide from it, pretend it wasn't her. But the other part, the part that had spent months learning to walk back into her own name, without flinching, stood a little taller every time she passed it. The town was hosting a small ceremony and anniversary event. Not to rehash the pain, they said, but to mark how far things had come. New leadership in the department, new policies in the schools, a community board that actually met, teachers who had taken diversity training seriously, officers who now walked neighborhoods without hands on their belts. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Isaiah had been asked to speak. So had Louise, and of course, Amira. But what she hadn't told anyone, not even them, was that she wasn't going to give a speech. She was going to play. She carried her violin case in her hand, walking the few blocks from home to the town square, alone. No security, no media team, just her. And a notebook in her jacket pocket filled with scribbled sheet music and a line that read, "Let this be the sound that outlives the silence." When she reached the stage, Isaiah was already there, standing behind the podium with his sleeves rolled up, voice calm, steady, proud. "She didn't ask for this," he said to the crowd, but she carried it anyway, with grace, with fire, with more courage than most grown men I've served beside. Louise sat near the front, her hands folded tightly over her lap. Her eyes glistened but didn't break. When Isaiah finished, he stepped aside, and the MC called Amira's name. She walked onto the stage slowly, violin in hand, head held high, wearing a light blue dress and a sunflower pin just above her heart. The crowd rose, not in applause, but in reverence. This wasn't a performance. It was something else. She stood in front of the mic and took a long breath. Then she looked out at the faces in the crowd, some familiar, some not. People who had marched, people who had doubted her, people who had stayed quiet, and those who had finally found the courage to speak. "I'm not going to say much," she began. Her voice was clear now, still soft, but grounded. "I've already said everything I needed to. You've heard it in the news, read it in the papers, watched it go viral. But what I want to leave you with today isn't a speech." She lifted her violin. "It's a sound." She stepped back, tuned the strings, and began. This piece wasn't titled. She didn't feel it needed one. It started with a low hum and echo of memory. Then came the shimmer, soft notes layered like pages turned slowly in a journal. Her bow swept across the strings, pulling pain and power into a single breath. And just when it seemed like the melody would settle, she shifted. The tempo lifted. A note of joy, subtle but steady. Laughter lived inside the next movement. A kind of freedom. A kind of remembering not of what was taken, but what survived. Children in the audience sat wide-eyed. An older woman in the back closed her eyes and nodded to the rhythm. A few people wept. When it ended, Amira let the silence stretch. She didn't need the applause. It came anyway. But it wasn't wild. It wasn't explosive. It was full, like gratitude, like recognition, like breath. She stepped down from the stage, violin still in hand. Isaiah hugged her at the steps. "You were brilliant." Louise pulled her close. "You're everything they didn't see coming." The rest of the afternoon unfolded in slow, warm waves. People came to say thank you. A little boy asked for a picture. A teacher offered her a copy of a curriculum she'd helped revise, one that now included a unit on protest through the arts. But just as the sun began to lower, painting the town square in gold, Amira stepped away from the crowd and returned to the edge of the sidewalk. The same square of pavement, the one where a year ago she'd stood in cuffs. Back then, it had felt like the end of something. Now, it felt like the beginning of everything. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded note. It was worn from being opened and closed 100 times. It was the one Keisha had written at the retreat, the one that said, "I want to be brave like you." Amira smiled, folded it again, and tucked it back into her coat. She looked out at the sky, soft with the promise of evening, and whispered something only the wind would hear. "I didn't ask for this, but I'm not giving it back." Then she turned and walked forward, not away from her past, but toward the future she was now ready to shape. Because the girl who had once been silenced didn't just find her voice. She became the echo others would follow. Sometimes life hands us pain that we never asked for, and sometimes that pain comes from the very people who were supposed to protect us. But what we do next, that's where the power lives. Amira Bell was just a child, walking to school with a violin and a dream. They tried to strip her of her dignity, of her voice, of her sense of safety. But instead of letting that moment define her, she turned it into music, into movement, into meaning. For those of us watching, especially those of us who've lived long enough to know what injustice looks like, there's something deeply sacred in her story, a reminder that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means standing, even when your legs shake, speaking, even when your voice cracks, and making sure the next generation knows your voice matters, your story matters. And silence, while comfortable, never changes the world. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories like this to life. Thank you for watching and keep standing tall.